Welcome everyone on our landmark 105th episode under Trends Literature series. We have today with us a very, very distinguished author, Mr. Arjun Raj Gaind, with his much talked about The Anatomy of Loss, which has been recently published by Bloomsbury, India. It has been, in fact, set amidst the political unrest in the aftermath of Operation Blue Star in 1984 and series of tragic events that followed. It's a personal narrative which intimately examines the long-lasting emotional ramification of the tragedy. Arjun, in fact, is also the author of a very Pakka Murder, Death at the Darbar, Missing Memsa. Besides, he's a very, very famous comic book writer, and some of his most famous graphic novels have been Empire of Blood, Blade of Warrior, among others. He's currently the editor of Third Eye. So welcome, Arjun. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute delight to be here. I'm delighted to be here, and I hope we have a fun session. So I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's, I must say that we had been looking forward to having you on our platform. As it is being said that, yes, you're back again. I thought your screen has frozen. So as it is being said that Anatomy of Loss is one of your most honest books, and definitely it's a deep personal work of fiction. So would you like to talk about it and elaborate and tell our viewers about your book?
I'd love to. Like all authors, I'm always delighted to talk about myself. So it's been a very long journey for this book. Actually, I wrote it in my early 20s, funnily enough, and I've talked about this on social media as well. It was much longer back then, much more self-indulgent. It was close to 500 pages long, and I'm not part of the literary scene. I don't really have any ins into the world of Indian publishing. So I knocked on a few doors back in the sort of late 90s, and much to my delight, one of India's best publishers, I won't name them, but they liked the book and they said that we'd love to work with you on it. But then some stuff happened, and after 2 years, the book came back to me. And then I had a similar experience with another excellent publisher around 2014. Both times the book came back, it's the second most heartbreaking thing that can happen to you in publishing. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept called remaindering. Have you ever heard of remaindering?
Unfortunately not. So would you like to talk about it?
Well, remaindering is when the publisher calls you up and says, look, no one is buying your book, so I'm going to pulp it, and I'm going to print a better book on the sort of pulp which your book was printed on. But then they give you the option to buy up all the remaining copies without covers, because covers cost a lot of money. So you end up with like a couple of big boxes filled with something you spent 5 years on or 6 years on, but without covers, of course. So that's easily the most heartbreaking thing in publishing. But having your book sold and then editing and then having it come back is the next worst thing I can think of. But finally, last year, my then girlfriend, now wife, who's wonderful, she discovered this manuscript, and she said that, why aren't you publishing it? And I told her it's not quite as simple as you think. But I'm essentially, being extremely Punjabi, I'm a natural pessimist. It comes very naturally to us, and a cynic, which is even worse. But we edited the book down from 520 pages to its current petite size, and much to my delight, a year and a half, well, more than a year and a half later, but it's out, and people seem to be enjoying it. So that's the journey of my little book. And yes, it's very personal. I witnessed certain parts of the troubles in 1984 personally. I think I was 7 at the time.
Yes.
And that makes me only more distinguished, I think, because now I'm the right age to be called distinguished. But I did experience some things, and a great many of the stories contained in the book are based on actual incidents that happened to friends and family. So it's a very personal book to me because I feel, as I have said often, that the only legacy which is really passed down from generation to generation is one of either love or hatred. And if we don't really learn from the mistakes that our ancestors or our family made, then we're doomed to repeat those mistakes again. And that's really what this book is about. It's about learning to leave that legacy behind.
I read the book, and I must tell everyone it's quite a fast read, and you kind of submerge yourself in the book and the story and the narrative. And also the fact that, as you just rightly mentioned, that some of which you've personally experienced, and and it is kind of piece of your heart. So yes, it's a very honest book, and I loved it, and I really definitely recommend everyone to definitely read it. Tell me, just mentioning that it was written a long time back, and then thank God the manuscript was discovered and you chose to publish the book. But how long did you really take to write it down and pen it down and kind of research really, which went into just putting all the figures right? Because there's so much of, I know it's a small book, but then it has so much of figures, so much of research that you seem to have done to put the narrative right, to put it absolutely on paper. Yeah, the way it was.
Well, the first draft all those years ago, I think it took me about 8 months. It was a very different book, though. It wasn't quite as emotional as this final manuscript is. Research actually is. I'm obsessed with research. I adore research. It's the best part. Certainly the best part of writing for me. And coming from a background of historical mystery, and it's fascinating how involved you can become. I think history really is ruined for us in the classroom, at least how we are taught history in India, because they only tell us about the broad sweep of events. It's din par ye hua, on this date this happened. And what I find fascinating about history and what excites me about it is the details. I want to know what they ate. I want to know the clothes that they wore. I want to know the gossip. I want to know, that's what excites me about it. And we forget that one of the easy things for us to do, Neeta, people our age, is that we tend to forget that people Dia's age look at 1984 as a part of history. And unless we can sort of immerse them in that world and make it come alive for them, the colors and the textures, and create that tapestry of experience which allows them to really know what it was like back then. You can't I think honesty and when I was in my 20s, I wanted to write like Salman Rushdie. I that's what I thought my voice was meant to be: pyrotechnic and exciting. And I still am. I believe I'm capable of doing stuff like that. But what happens is, I don't think you decide the voice of a story. I think the story decides its own voice. And I think in many, maybe I'm being esoteric here, but I think the writer is like a vessel. The story pours through you. Maybe there's some greater power. Maybe there's uh, the universe. I don't know. Maybe it's Saraswati. Whatever did you wish to choose, but someone is pouring this story through you, and I think you can only choose to tell it as naturally as possible. And I mean, that's the same reason why I chose first person. The original draft was written in third person, and one of the big changes for me was changing it to first person because it felt more honest. So all included, it's taken me, I'd say, 8 months for the first draft, about 4.5 months of hard work for the second draft, and a good 25 years in between to learn how to write properly. So that's how long it's taken me.
Yeah, because I wanted you to talk about it. I have read it somewhere, that kind of time it took for you to write, and it's very important for the viewers to know that the kind of hard work that and kind of honesty that has gone into writing this book and making the narrative really, come alive to the present generation. I think hats off to you for that. But tell me, how difficult was it for you to kind of the course of this book, to relive the moments, to relive in parts what you went through. It must have been definitely challenging. It must have been very difficult.
Well, it's always difficult. I think inherently the experience of sitting down to write a book is one of the most difficult experiences. Certainly, I think women have far more emotional maturity and sensitivity. But for a guy, for a man, the closest we can come to childbirth is, creating something. So I'm not equating the two. Uh, I'm not uh, comparing the two. I'm just saying that from a metaphorical point of view, it's always difficult to sit down and write, and it's also one of the most self-defeating um, sort of endeavors you can undertake. Now, I don't know anyone who can really sit down and say that, oh, you know, uh, it's a very unnatural thing to try and write. It's not something, I don't believe it's a natural. I think as humans as well, we are oral storytellers. I think when you sit down to write, in fact, I know some wonderful storytellers who can't write to save their lives, because sitting down and writing is an inherently artificial experience, because you're taking and for me it was very difficult, because most of the stories in here are oral narratives. They're stories that were told to me of things that happened to people who I knew and loved and cared about, in my family, my friends. Um, I think all of us. I'm sure you've heard 100 stories about the troubles that happened during 1984. First Blue Star, then the events following Indira Gandhi's assassination. Um, but I think what happens is that there's a very big difference between the abilities you possess as a 25-year-old and the abilities you possess as a 45-year-old. And I think the two hardest things for a writer, while I'm sure talent is something which is really important, I'm not even going to get into a debate about inherent and natural talent. Um, I think perspective and emotional clarity is something that you can't really gain without experience. And I don't know, it's the reason why uh, in part of me is actually quite glad that this book wasn't published in my 20s, because um, the the emotional maturity that I have now, after facing the despair of having a book sent back, of the despair of waiting such a long time to publish your first work of. I mean, I had a pretty decent career going as a writer of comic books, and I had a very decent career going as a writer of historical mystery. So um, it's gratifying, but at the same time, it makes you realize that you have to create an emotional distance between yourself and your work, because otherwise you're going to end up driving yourself mad. And uh, I mean, writing the book is the easy part. This is the hard part, getting people to read it, getting people to care. I mean, I'm very grateful that you took time out to read the book and that you enjoyed it. But mark my words, even with uh, when A Very Pakka Murder came out, I can't remember the 57 5-star reviews I got, but I remember the first 1-star review that I got on Goodreads, and that'll stay with me. So you have to cultivate. I think somebody once asked me what's the most important quality that a writer should have. And honestly, it's a thick skin. Unless you develop a certain thickness of skin, you're in a lot of trouble. You really are. So, sorry, I hope that answered your question.
No, it did answer. And, the book, as I mentioned, you've written in a very easy to read style, set against a very, very heavy narrative. So was this while you were writing, or perhaps when the book was published, you must be carrying emotional baggage with you, something heavy. So after the book published, did you get rid of that, or still it hangs on? I mean, all of us have gone through that period of 1980. It
Well,
still brings you.
I think, as I mentioned, I'm Punjabi, I'm Sikh, and um, I think along with the Jews, we've mastered the art of guilt. We carry ancestral and familial guilt around from generation to generation. I mean, I have nothing to complain about. To be honest, yes, my generation has witnessed a certain degree of history. But unlike, I mean, my mother was, I think she was 3 years old when 4 years old when partition happened, and her family and her walked from Baluchistan to Dehradun, and um, it's why I say, I mean, I'm a big fan of her generation, because they fought real battles. They faced struggles every day, and I don't just I think it's impossible to ignore the weight of ancestry if you're Indian. It doesn't matter which part of India you're from. But anyone who sits back and says that I don't really care about the past, I feel very sad for them, because a big part of what being Indian means is about accepting, understanding, and caring about the past. It's everything, our histories, and not just the history of our country, the history of our families is present. It's present in the food we eat, the way every family has a different recipe. It's present in the way we treat our elders. It's present in the way that we speak. I mean, our accents are shaped by our familial ancestry. I don't think it's that generational trauma of being Indian is what makes us Indian. I mean, um, honestly, what is it about India that unites someone from, say, Kashmir with someone from Tamil Nadu or someone from Gujarat? The people in Gujarat could not care less about what's happening in Assam, but what unites us all at the end of the day is that sense of shared antecedents. That I think it was it? I forget. There was a very famous historian who said nationalism is a sense of shared antecedents and a common enemy. Um, I don't think we have a common enemy anymore, but the one enemy that we all are united in hating is our past. I've never understood why Indians hate their past so much. I mean, it's such a rich and wonderful thing, and particularly a familial history. So yes, it's a trauma we carry around. There's a wonderful line from, I think it's The Wasteland, which says, "These are the fragments I shore against my ruins." So that's what the trauma is. You can't be who you are. I don't genuinely believe you can be. Um, I think cultural identity is what defines us as people. And unless we accept and embrace and understand these things, both on a personal and a social level, I think we will be truncated shadows of human beings. So that's my 2 bits.
So very well said. And absolutely, some of which you mentioned, I also feel about it the same. But why the title, The Anatomy of Loss? I know earlier you had contemplated it should be Anatomy of Scars. Why Anatomy of Loss?
So that's thanks to the good people at Bloomsbury.
Okay.
So they wanted to change the name. They felt The Anatomy of Scars was rather hard hitting. I was not averse to it.
Hmm.
My suggestion to them was we call it The Anatomy of Sorrow. They didn't. They liked it, but they said, "Can you give us a few more suggestions?" I suggested, along with a list, in typical copywriter fashion, when you give 15 different suggestions, and they decided to go. In fact, I didn't know it was called The Anatomy of Loss until I was informed by my publisher, and I'm grateful to them because it seems to have worked out very nicely. So I'm not complaining.
Right, and there have been such wonderful reviews that I've been reading about the book. And recently, I think the Assam Tribune also mentioned in the headline that your book is a touching testimony. So, how does the promising response to the book affect you? Before Dia takes over and asks her share of question, I'd like to ask you that.
Well, I don't know. It's very difficult to tell. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound pompous, but I know it's a good book. I'm a more than averagely well-read person, and I am fairly open-minded. I try all genres, so I know what's going on, and I know it's a good book, and I expect it to have good reviews. There have been some great reviews. It's not a perfect book by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very gratifying. The validation is always something you look for. I don't know how I feel about. Uh, I don't know how the book is selling. I, shockingly enough, have not been to a bookstore yet. It's been a month and some days since it came out. The last time I was in a bookstore was about a month ago, and I haven't had a chance to see how it's selling. I know my family is deeply delighted at it. They have been. I'm pretty sure about 80% of our sales has been my family and my classmates. But
So very humble of you to say that, but I'm sure it is reaching wide and across.
that's very sweet of you to say as well. But at the end of the day, I think um, yes, the great reviews are very satisfying. But um, the best review that I got from anyone was the gentleman on who the character of OPS is based.
Okay.
He's an uncle of mine, and he called me up, and I haven't spoken to him for close to 20 years.
Very
Lovely,
touching.
lovely
Yeah,
gentleman. He called me
I'm
up
sure.
out of the blue. I don't know how he got my number. So he said, "You know what, son, Putter." He said, "You know what, Putter, you're not so bad." So I take that as the best review that I've gotten so far. Um, and yeah, it's nice. Thank you. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the book.
Awesome. Yeah, Dia, your questions. Before we move on to the interactive round, first your question, please. Yeah.
So, so first of all, I have to say, you already know this, but it is an amazing, amazing book. I've been reading it and I've been completely immersed in it. And I love the fact that along with the character, as they're feeling the emotions, I can feel them too. If the character is confused, I can feel how he feels. And that is absolutely amazing. I've not been able to put down the book at all.
That's very kind of you. If that's how you feel about the book, then I've achieved something very, very, very rare, which all writers aspire to, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
It really is what I'm feeling right now. So, to my first question, you mentioned this before, like people around me that are my age, they see it as history, as facts, as dates and figures to learn about. So, do you think in now's times it's difficult for people with first-hand experience in these situations to translate what happened to people in now's generation? Do you think that today's generation sees it just as a story and not something more than that?
Well, it's not that your generation doesn't care. That's not true at all. I mean, you just have to look at the fact that there's a proliferation of nonfiction and memoir in India. Why does nonfiction and memoir outsell fiction? It's a complex question, but I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to, all writing, and writers don't think of this because the majority of us write to satisfy ourselves. You know, the critic you're writing to satisfy is yourself, and that's important too. But there's also the matter of engagement. You have to engage with your reader, and um, what happens very often is your people don't want to be, especially people your age, from what I know of them. Is it? Can I call you a Gen Zer?
Yes,
Does
yes.
that work, or do you not
Yes.
like that? Is that a pejorative? No.
No, no, it works.
Okay, so Gen Z readers, in my experience, don't like being talked to. They like being talked with. And
Very
it's
true.
very, yeah, it's very easy to talk at people. It's very easy to talk to people, to give a lecture, to give a speech, to submit an oral dissertation which puts you to sleep, you know. But to engage with someone, to actually make them part of the story, and that's something I think Gen Zers seek, because unlike my generation, unlike your mom's generation, we we didn't have the ease of access to information. We didn't have the kind of I remember being deeply excited when television formally came to India. You know, cable TV. It was the like I was so excited. Before that, we used to go borrow films and they cost us money. And even books, we didn't have the ease of access to. I mean, in fact, that's one of the things that unites all of us, our generation, is the books we read, because all of us only got to read stuff like Enid Blyton, and that's where we started. And but your generation, Gen Z, you guys have so many more choices, and unless my generation learns to, it's the same thing that happened with my generation and my parents' generation. We were like, oh, you don't listen to us, you don't understand us, because we want to wear like torn jeans and listen to heavy metal. They didn't. They were like, it's all about creating perspective. And unless as a writer you teach yourself, and I've been through this, it's taken me 20 years of working at it. As a writing is not an art. People will tell you, oh, that divine, the muses, whichever muse you choose to follow. I'm a fan of Melpomene, but she will reach down and transmit meaning, inspiration will strike you. None of that. It's like carpentry. You have to sit down, you have to work at it. You have to do your 2 hours a day, you have to do your 2 pages a day, and slowly but steadily you have to read. I love it. Dia, do you know a great many writers who say that, oh, I don't need to read? Because I tend to be bumping into a lot of them nowadays, especially below 30. So the best advice I ever got, when I was 22, when I wrote my first book, this publisher told me, you have talent, but you need to read. Because if you don't read, you can't know all the things that people are trying. And I went out and I spent the next 10 years just reading whatever I could get my hands on. I read rubbish, I read some wonderful books, and the place that all of us occupy in the middle, between rubbish and wonderful, wonder, whatever. But the point that I'm trying to make is that unless you find some way to connect with your reader, it could be intellectually, which a great many writers do very well. It could be emotionally, which also it could even be just through the pure power of storytelling. Some of the best, funnily enough, some of the books I have enjoyed reading most are bad books. But what makes them enjoyable is that they connect with you. So that's my spiel. I feel maybe it's because I wrote this book in my 20s and edited it in my 40s that I'm able to connect with your generation.
Right. I think in relation to my question, the problem I would see is the fact that a lot of Gen Zers' knowledge would be limited to their history books, which in fact doesn't tell them anything, nothing about what actually happened. So it's just, we have to be open to learn more and find more sources and everything. That seems like the solution to this.
True, but that's why you guys are so fortunate, because there's such wonderful examples of oral history narrative out there now, where stories, Achal Malhotra, oh my God, what fantastic writing, there's this wonderful Anusha Yadav, the Memory Project. In Bombay, we've got this wonderful lady called Simin Patel, who's got a thing, Bombay Wali, where they'll tell you these stories, and that's what you want to know. I mean, that's what I personally want to know. The other day, I read this incredible article about how this gentleman created Pani Puri in Bombay. And it's not just an ordinary story. It's a story of tragedy and triumph and great vicissitude. But we didn't have that option. We couldn't just pick up our phones and find these things. The most rewarding part for me has always been the journey. It's not the destination, because that's when you really not just learn about yourself, but you learn about other people and you learn about their stories. And the moment stories become obsolete, we become obsolete, because it's stories that change us. It's stories that define us. It's stories that make us bigger than we are, and the moment we stop being interested in other people's stories. So that's what's happening with, in my opinion, and please feel free to contradict me, but we are so busy chronicling the sort of intricacies of the minute intricacies of our lives, that we've forgotten that our lives are one tiny piece of a vast jigsaw puzzle. You know, I went to lunch the other day with this friend who got furious with me because I ate my food before he could photograph it. And I was like, you're so busy photographing it that I don't want to lose out on that. You know, I'm a first bite person. I don't know. Are you a first bite person or a last bite person?
Maybe a last bite person. I'm not sure.
And then you're going to go a lot further than me, because I'm that person who, the moment you put a nice plate of food in front of me, I need to take that first bite because I need instant, I need gratification there and then. Of course, I'll save a nice bit for the end, but because I went to boarding school, that last bit always got stolen by the seniors, you know. So you want to eat fast and you want to eat, but I've never understood this phenomenon of stopping to take pictures. I mean, of chronicling your food, right? But in a way, those memories that that person is creating are what will be the narratives that people will follow tomorrow. So for me, that's what's exciting as well, you know. So we have to realize that there's the day we realize that there's more to life than us, than, you know, than the big I. That's the day when things just sort of your imagine and the imagination. I mean, we cannot survive as a people without imagination. Uh, you know, the moment we become so entirely materialistic that everything is about things, then we won't be creating new things. You see, and writing ultimately the currency. Writing is the physical currency of imagination. If anyone dares to tell you otherwise, slap them, because you cannot. It is the fuel that sustains and propagates imagination, and without imagination, what's the point of life? I mean, that's my belief. Please feel free to contradict me.
No, sir, beautifully said. Just like you beautifully written the book. Uh,
Too many compliments. My head's already large enough, so no.
and in fact, in just the beginning of the book, I loved how you used Himmat Singh growing a stubble as to show the initial innocence and how it changed as times grew difficult even for a child. So I wanted to ask, did you always plan to write the book uh, as appealing to a personal perspective, or was it initially supposed to be more about political understanding rather than this?
Well, honestly, all politics is personal. You can't separate yourself from the politics, the political events that we experience them through the prism of what's happening around us. I mean, you can't escape that. If you try to say, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professor, I don't have a great and deep understanding. I know a lot of stuff, but I don't necessarily understand all of it. But what I have realized is that for so many of the things that happen to us, and the upheavals that we face, the troubles that we've experienced, it's been very personal. And as a people, we take it personally. I think we take the three things that all Indians take very personally are politics, cricket, uh, and I think money, inflation. These are the three things that every Indian, regardless of social strata or caste or religion, another thing we take very, very personally. So, in fact, I'd put religion above inflation. So, as a writer, to not talk about these things is very difficult. But how do you tell a story without making it political? I actually think I have a deeply political story. The only difference is that unlike someone who's taking an obvious political stance, I've attempted to take a neutral stance, because then you get a sense of how the people there felt. Um, I mean, from a political standpoint, can you segregate? Um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with all the things that went into 1984, but into creating that mess. But can you really segregate the politics of the time from that dreadful year, you can't. But what you can do is, I'm not trying to create an analysis of what happened. I'm just trying to show you of how it felt from the point of view of, in fact, the choice of choosing a child as the protagonist is intentional. It's completely intentional, because children have the purest eyes. They see things. It's not just innocence. It's that unflagging candor. Nobody tells. That's the weird thing, as kids, we tell absolute truth, and then somewhere along the way, we society conditions us to forget that habit. And some of the most interesting ideas. There was even a show on TV called Kids Say the Darndest Things, because nobody actually tells the truth like a child, and I was inspired very much by this wonderful French film. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called Goodbye, My Children. It's by Louis Malle, Au revoir, les enfants. It's a lovely film, and it's got a bunch of children as the narrators, and it's a film I've admired. So I wondered, can I tell a story in a similar pattern? And I do believe, Dia, that it's a deeply political story, but at the same time, I think it's how all of us see politics through the eyes of our families and through um, the things that happen to us every day. I mean, for me, the lockdown will always be about, yes, in one part it's about the horrible things that were happening and the hardships that so many people around India face. But for me, it'll always be about going and standing in lines for groceries, and finally, in a way, having my need to have hand sanitizer and masks, which I've been carrying hand sanitizer around since the mid-90s, and now it was finally not strange anymore. And these are the things you remember, like I have a distinct memory, for example, of when the Babri Masjid fell. The memory I have is of DuckTales on Doordarshan being interrupted. So that DuckTales was the show where Mickey and Donald's nephews used to travel around. It was the only cartoon we got to watch on Sundays in boarding school. And I have this distinct memory of us watching this, and suddenly the news interrupting it. And we weren't outraged at the mosque being demolished. We were outraged at our cartoons being interrupted. And that is really how I believe you can't separate your personal life from your political life. Anyone who can, they are far, far, far more talented than I am.
Right, sir. That makes a lot of sense, actually. That really does.
I ramble a lot, I'm sorry.
No, I think all of this is something all of us will need to hear. And I feel like having a very long discussion with you right now. So this is actually my last question before the interactive round. After this, we will be moving on to the questions of the audience. So I would like to ask, which one of your books is your favorite? You've written quite a few of them. And is there any particular genre you would like to delve in after graphic novels and historical mysteries? Yes, sir.
It's a horrible question to ask. Horrible. It's like asking me to choose between my children. But actually, curiously enough, I'm very excited about my next book. It's something that I've been working on for close to 6 years. It'll be my first nonfiction book, and it's been a very, very difficult book for me to write. It's been stop and start. I put in close to 3.5 years of research. And then the pandemic came around, and it was like back to square one. And now it's finally starting to come together. And I won't tell you about it yet. I hope I get to speak to you next year when it releases. I'll send you guys a copy. But I'm going to try to address the second part of your question, which is about genres. I have never really, there are authors and there are writers who will tell you that we work in one genre. I don't think, I think if you can write pretty much anything. There's also a massive difference between writing and writing well, which really involves, again, it's work. You have to put in the time. I fell into comic books quite by chance. I didn't think it was something. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm one of those otaku fanboy types. Um, I've been collecting comic books for most of my life, but I never thought it's something I would get to write. I am not one of, not a very famous, or contrary to what my information panel may say, I'm not a particular. We have some great Indian writers of comic books out there, but I was very fortunate to have a chance to try my hand at it. It was a very, very difficult learning process. Nobody really, it's like they handed me the reins to a horse and said, learn to ride. I pretty much managed to teach myself how to do it. It's a tough skill. It's still a skill which is very close to my heart. It's actually much more difficult than writing prose. So I am a huge fan of comic books, and the historical mysteries, it was an experiment. Uh, Before I had the chance of releasing Paka Murder, I think Madhulika Lidl was the only person who was writing historical mystery in India. In the West, it's a very well-established genre. So again, for me, what's exciting about genres is the journey as you teach yourself how to write in that genre. I mean, I have this book of nonfiction out next year, hopefully. After that, I have my first science fiction novel out, which I'm excited about. Again, a very different world, and I had the pleasure of editing an anthology of science fiction a couple of years back. We're still waiting for it to be released. And right now, where I am in my life, science fiction, fantasy from the subcontinent is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I find it shocking, saddening, appalling, and incredibly depressing that for a country of 1 point something billion people, we have a handful of writers of science fiction and fantasy, and there's so many wonderful voices out there. When we set out to put together this anthology, it was called Third Eye. You won't believe, we had a wonderful writer who's a game designer who had never tried to write before, and he wrote an amazing story for us. We had a gentleman who reviewed movies, who's a very well-known film reviewer, who wrote a wonderful story for us. We had a dear friend of mine who is an advertising, who comes from an advertising background, who wrote a really cool story for us. So there are these wonderful stories out there waiting to be told, and it's very exciting to have a chance to right now, more than writing, I'm excited at the thought of editing stuff, because you're creating I mean, we're like it's like Star Trek. We're the explorers boldly going where no one has gone before. So hopefully, I genuinely believe in the next 4 or 5 years, you're going to see this entire this wellspring of fantastic Indian writing, speculative fiction writing coming out, and I'm delighted if I can be a part of that in some small way. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Fantastic. I mean, we are already looking forward to your next book next year, and hopefully we can perhaps launch it in an offline event with us next year. Who knows? Otherwise, we are always there on the online. We have Yuvraj Dhingra. He's an aspiring civil service aspirant who wants to bring change to the world, and he's just completed his class 12th exam. So, Yuvraj, your question, please.
Right. Good evening, sir. So, firstly, I must tell that it's an absolute honor to listen to you speak so passionately about the topic, which is highly sensitive yet personal and dear to you. So, my question arises from the fact that, we as people are always taught to, accept what is positive in our life, what is happening positive in our life or the nation's history. And we don't associate it with politics or controversy. But when it certainly comes to, not so positive and not so the brightest parts, facets of our history or political life, there's always this notion of political connotation attached with it. For example, if I say that India in the past had been a really grab up of everything, be it spices, manufactured cloth, there's no mention of politics in it. But when we come to the tragedies which happened with us, there's always a sense of maybe controversy, political connotation, like so why is it that people always accept positive things and not owe up to the not so brightest part of the history and political life of a nation? So why is that confusion that people of our generation or people in generally face, that we need to just accept the positive aspect of a nation, and we should be really docile or maybe quiet about the negative aspect, and we shouldn't talk about it maybe outspokenly?
Wow, that's an amazing question. You're probably going to get me killed,
No.
but I will try to answer it. I think I can't speak for people, all the people in the world or in India. I don't think it would be a fair position for me to take. I can certainly tell you about how I feel about the question that you've asked. Um, the first thing that you have to understand is, it's been said by a great many people, but I think the gist of the thought that I'm trying to say here is that history is written by victors. It's ultimately, the first thing you have to realize is history is not an absolute. It's a work in progress, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either being paid to say that, or they have written a couple of books about it and they don't want to change their mind, or they're stubborn, or they're just plain stupid. But history is a work in progress. We tend to think of the past as an absolute. It's not. It's just we're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Ideas change, ideas invert, ideas sometimes. But what is fascinating for me about history and by proxy ideas is not the ideas themselves. It's the transmission. It's how ideas change as they travel from one person to another. Stories are the same. No two stories are exactly the same. In the same way, no two analyses of historical events will be the same. Now, what you have to learn to do, or let me rephrase that, what you have to teach yourself to do. Teaching yourself something and learning are two very different processes, right? So I won't preach at you. I'm not going to preach at you. You're a young man. As Neeta said, you want to do great things and you want to change the world, right? So all I'm saying is you have to teach yourself a very simple skill. You have to find a bunch of abstracts and you have to tell yourself that this is what I believe. Okay? Nobody can tell you what those ideas are. Nobody can tell you what those abstracts are. You have to find them for yourself. You can find them by experiencing things. You can find them by reading. In fact, that group of abstracts that you believe in, that's your philosophy. Okay? So until you create a philosophy for yourself and find something to believe in. Now, I personally grew up being what I was being taught and what I derived from that. It was the abstracts that mattered more to me than the physical realities. I grew up, my grandfather, my father taught me that what's most important about being a man is having this thing called character. Now, I don't know what it is. I still, at 46, do not know what connotes or defines character. It's a mysterious thing. I mean, I can tell you what a pair of Nikes are. I can tell you what SEO is, but I cannot tell you what character is. The one lesson that I have learned is you have to decide for yourself what that is. And then you have to take those abstracts and examine the things that people are saying through the prism of those abstracts. Now, only you can decide what that is. And it's constantly changing. The ideas you believe in at 20 are going to be very different from the ideas you believe at 40. But you have to decide what it is you want. Okay. I decided I want to live my life according to 3 simple principles. Okay. I don't want to screw anyone over. I don't want to lie. And I don't want to make money by doing anything flagrantly illegal. These were my 3 goals. Now, I believed as long as I did these 3 things, so honor, morality, and decency, as long as I lived according to honor, morality, and decency, I have character. This is what I told myself at 18. I've made it through 20-something years without messing this code up. Okay. So what I'm saying is, forget about the noise. Everything that is said, everything that passes for narrative, it's noise. You have to define what are the components of your philosophy. And once you do that, then even if you still don't understand history, at least you have a foundation to build. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, sir. Actually, that's a really good strategy. I'd like to apply that. Thank you, sir, for answering my question. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Please don't call me sir. I'm Arjun. I'm not at sir levels yet. But yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Arjun. Now we have Mr. Vijay Shankar. He's a very senior lawyer with Supreme Court, and he has a question for you. Vijayji, will you like to please switch on your video? Yes.
Good evening, sir. Many congratulations on your book. Am I audible?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Sir, my first question is, which risk under these situations, like what happened in Blue Star, or what happened after the assassination of Indraji? I mean, which action carries greater risk for the government? The risk of action or the risk of inaction? And if you permit me, I have one more question, sir.
Yes,
my second question is that how did you engage with so many divergent narratives on this episode?
Well, thank you. 2 very different and 2 very difficult questions. Thank you for asking them. I can't possibly. I'm not educated enough or experienced enough to speak for someone on a governmental level. I think what happens very often is it's not about action or inaction. I think it's about action and reaction. I think a lot of the stuff that happens at the political level becomes about, something happens, then governments feel compelled to react. And often what happens is, if you break it all down to basic human ideas, it comes down to hatred begets more hatred. Now I know it's very easy for someone to speak. Hindsight is always 2020. Do I think the events of 1984 were politically justified? I don't. Do I believe that the government was in wrong to enter the Akal Takht? Yes, I do. Was I there? Did I see it happen? No, I wasn't there. I'm speaking from a student of history. I believe it was an incredibly wrong thing to do. But as a person who has had enough time to read and examine and develop perspective about the event, I don't see what else they could have done. Because the events that were in place, the sequence of events that was unfolding, it was bound to end in violence. It's like anyone who talks about partition. If someone is to tell you, oh, partition could have happened differently, yes, it could. But it would have still had a violent outcome, because hatred always begets more hatred. There's no escaping. You can't have cause leads to effect. In the same way, if something, you see, so I can't speak as I'm not an expert when it comes to politics, and I wouldn't want to take that position. From my personal perspective, I feel both sides were wrong, because it takes two people to cause a fight. One side may have been more wrong than the other, but that ultimately is the domino effect that comes into place. You see, it's like the one thing I've learned about India is whoever shouts the loudest wins. So that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, when people are fighting, whoever shouts the loudest wins. And it in a mob, when a mob gathers, you can't control it. It's a living organism of its own kind. So whatever the causes of the events of 1984, I'm not interested in that. I mean, I'm interested in it from a historical perspective, but it's the fallout of those effects which we are still feeling today. You see, if we don't look back and we don't ask ourselves that why, I mean, for an event which happened close to, I think, 30 years ago, we
38
still
years.
haven't had, sorry, sir?
I think it is 38 years ago, around 38,
38
37,
years ago,
38
so
years.
almost 40 years ago. And we still haven't had a clear-cut engagement. People are still talking about it in hush whispers. You know, it's still, I've had people tell me, oh, it's a Punjab ki event, it doesn't apply to the rest of India. You know, oh, it's a regional thing. Oh, Delhi mein hua. The riots happened largely in Delhi, right? I mean, following Indira Ji's assassination, I think Delhi felt the real brunt of what was happening. What I do believe is that unless we teach ourselves, again, I come back to that idea of teaching ourselves, unless we teach ourselves to take two steps back and get rid of the fog, get rid of the noise, and actually examine something and make our own minds up for it. I'm not, Dia asked me why I chose not to be political about the book, right? I said it's a very political book. What I'm trying to do is I'm telling you the stories that I know from that time. I'm not trying to tell you how to make your mind up. Some of the readers may feel deeply passionately, they may feel anger at what they read. Others may feel empathy. But the job of the writer is to try and convey as honest a picture as possible. So when it comes to your question about the politics, I think I'm not a qualified enough expert to give you my political opinion about it, but I can give you my personal opinion. And this is where my legal training is also coming in, Vijayji. I'm not as good a lawyer, certainly, as you, but I believe that unless we learn to examine the events of the past with a certain open-mindedness, which is not tainted by politics or by what they call the spin. You see, unless we learn to do that, unless we teach ourselves to make our minds up for ourselves, then we're in some big trouble. Okay. Now, the second part of your question, which is a lovely question, which is how did I manage to link so many narratives together? It actually came very naturally and holistically, because I'm sure you've interacted with Punjabis. We tend
Yes,
to
sir.
talk about 15 different things at the same time.
Sir.
So I found myself just channeling these voices that I've grown up with. You know, I had aunties who I would be sitting with who'd be talking about like my shirt being unpressed, as they call it, not ironed, but unpressed shirt
Sir,
pehni hai. And then the next thing I'd hear about someone during 1984 who the police arrested him क्योंकि उसके कपड़े बड़े बेकार लग रहे थे and उसको मार पड़ी और फिर ये हुआ फिर वो. You see, if you open yourself up to the and I come back to what I said to Neeta right in the very beginning, that as all Indians are wonderful storytellers, and when we get into the flow of the story, when we are raconteurs, you know, we once you let the stories flow, they go everywhere. So that was the point of having multiple narratives sort of coexisting to make it seem as natural as possible.
Sir.
Does that answer your question?
Sir, definitely. And I'm looking forward to read your book. And I was a student of history before dabbling with law. My honors is in history. BA honors is in history from
Wonderful.
Maharashtra.
Wonderful.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. and all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vijayji, for being a regular on a platform, and it really adds value. Thank you so much, Arjun, for such an engrossing conversation. And I really, really wish you all the best for your book. I'm sure it is doing very well, and it will do even better. And all of you can order it on Amazon, or maybe look around in the bookshops near you. It's definitely worth a read. And anything that you would like to say, Arjun?
No, just that I'm deeply honored by the privilege of chatting with you and with all the people who attended. I'm grateful you guys took time out to let me waffle on about all and sundry, and I hope to have the joy of seeing you again.
Oh, yes.
And please take care and have a lovely evening. Yeah?
Thank you so much. We
Thank
also
you.
look forward, and yes, and thank you, Bloomsbury, for putting together this conversation. It
Thank
was
you.
really a
Bye.
wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.